Here's Gilgeous-Alexander. McCollum staying with him. Spins, gets inside. Left-handed off the glass. Oh, what a sweet move.
Giddey, tough spot. Backdoor. What a pass. What a play. And J-Dub picks the pocket of Trae Young. He'll take it himself.
This is Dart. You're listening to the Uncontested.
What is up, Thunder fans, and welcome to the Uncontested Postgame Podcast edition. I'm your host for tonight, Tayler Peterson. You can find me on Twitter and social media platforms at Tayler_P15. And man, do I have a very fun one to break down tonight as the Thunder beat the Warriors, go up 3-1 in the season series, 138-136 in overtime at home in a huge victory Friday night in front of a packed Paycom Center. Just an incredibly fun game. I'm really excited to break down. But before I get any further, we are a proud part of the Blue Wire Podcast Network and dailythunder.com. And if you don't already, be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Leave us a 5-star rating. Be greatly appreciated. Helps us out a lot. So if you love what you're hearing, if you like our analysis, we greatly appreciate you all leaving a review. And per usual, you can find us on all social media platforms, Twitter, Instagram, or I guess X, whatever you want to call it. Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, TikTok, you name it, we're there. But we're really focusing on our YouTube content right now. So be sure to follow us there for all of our live streams, our group podcast, post games, even some additional bonus content will all be on there. So be sure to tune in. I'm going solo tonight. So I already see a ton of you all in the comments. Unfortunately, I had to stop the original live stream because I'm a little rusty here on my solo post games. And so I fired this new one up, and I really appreciate all of you tuning in. Be sure to drop all of your comments, questions, etc., because as I'm going solo tonight, it makes it a lot more fun when I'm able to interact with you all and able to answer some questions and reply to some comments. So be sure to keep dropping those, and I'll be sure to get to those. But like I mentioned, just what an incredibly fun game. Thunder end up winning this one 138-136 in overtime. There were times, especially in that first half, where it didn't feel like the Thunder really had it tonight. Kind of a theme over the past couple of games that we've seen from the Thunder. And then that second half, the Thunder really got things going. They end up, and we'll get into a brief game breakdown, but we get into overtime. It seems like the Thunder finally kind of have things under control. Maybe this is it. And none other than Steph Curry himself loves playing in OKC. That guy, it's absolutely absurd. He keeps things way too close for comfort, but the Thunder end up pulling this one off. So like I mentioned, a lot to break down here. Be sure to keep dropping your comments and questions. But just a very, very brief game breakdown. I'm not even really going to get into the first half even, but just some big things that kind of stood out to me from halftime into overtime. At halftime, the Thunder only were down by 6, which is pretty significant considering that they only shot 47% from the floor and most importantly, were 2 of 14 from 3. Again, this is a post-game podcast. I don't have this pulled up. This is something we can get into maybe on our group podcast on Sunday, but this is certainly a theme over the past couple of games that the Thunder have kind of struggled. A lot of that is due to the three-point shooting. This Thunder team can be a great three-point shooting team. In fact, I was listening to Matt Pinto there for a little bit before I was able to actually watch the game live there, like very early in the game. But I mean, he mentioned the Thunder were the best three-point shooting team in the league up until tonight, and they shoot only 2 of 14 from 3. That's obviously a huge, I don't know if you want to call it a swing skill, but a swing stat for this Thunder roster, this Thunder team. When they are hitting those threes, they're a very tough team to beat. But I think in a game like tonight, where they're facing that adversity, they're playing a great veteran squad in the Golden State Warriors. They are shooting so poorly from 3, and yet 2 of 14 from 3 at halftime. They're still only down 6. That's the theme we'll get into here in a bit. But just moving forward, Thunder outscored the Warriors 33-22 in the third quarter. A very fun third quarter where, honestly, I mean, there was a lot of calls in this game. That first half specifically, I thought the refs were blowing a very tight whistle, particularly towards the Thunder. We saw it very early on. Mark Daniel get very upset, actually get teed up. And even after being teed up, like, I'm kind of surprised he kept going after the refs because he was fired up there after I believe it was a loose ball steal is what Mark thought, but it ended up resulting in a foul, I think, on none other than Draymond Green, and he was livid. It certainly felt like the Warriors got a pretty generous call, a generous whistle there in that first half, but honestly, throughout the remainder of the game, it certainly balanced out, but there was a lot of foul calls in general from the refs, and the reason I mentioned that is because with a team like the Thunder, who play so well and their offense really relies on them getting stops defensively and pushing the ball in transition, creating those transition opportunities, which we also will get into. When you're calling such a choppy game like that on both sides of the floor, it's really hard to get into a rhythm. And what we saw in the second half was that to kind of settle a little bit, and the Thunder were really able to get steals, get force turnovers, and be able to push the ball in transition and really kind of spark that offense. And when the refs aren't calling it quite as tight as they were in the first half, although I would still say it was tight, that was a big bonus. So like I mentioned, that third quarter was huge for the Thunder. They're leading the Warriors by 6. The Warriors start the fourth quarter on a 17-8 run, and it was led not by Steph, not by Game 6 Clay, not even by Draymond. It was rookie Brandon Podziemski who really kind of gave the Warriors a spark there off the bench, I thought, in that fourth quarter. And that was huge for them on both sides of the ball. I thought he played really well. So we're about a little over 8 minutes left in the game. Mark subs in Shai with, like I said, a little over 8 to go. But he keeps Josh Giddey in. And I thought Josh had a good game. He had a decent game. And we'll get into that. But that lineup really has been struggling with Giddey. 2 open threes in the same possession, but the Thunder get 4 offensive rebounds. Just incredible effort. One of those was from Shai himself, leading to a Shai and 1. And Giddey was subbed out very quickly after, and he did not see the floor again through regulation or overtime. That's just something worth noting. Shai starts to do superstar stuff and just was insane. That really was kind of sparked, I think, by a steal he had on the other end of the floor. We'll talk about Shai's steals tonight and his defense as a whole. That led to a pass to Isaiah Joe, who found Wiggins cutting back door. Just incredible transition basketball by the Thunder. And that ties things up at 103. And then we're going to fast forward a little bit here. Dort tweaks an ankle, and I got really worried. He was still on the floor for the majority of the play. Excuse me. He was on the other end of the floor while the when the Warriors were on offense on the other end of the floor. He finally is able to jog up. The Thunder call, or I think it was an official timeout, and Dort's sitting there just on the floor, like rubbing on that ankle. He has trainers come up to him. He's obviously subbed out, and then he goes back to the locker room. I'm thinking, oh no, we're looking at maybe a 2-week injury. Let's hope this isn't too bad. I believe it was Isaiah Joe who came in, but thankfully, not too long after, here comes none other than Lou Dort jogging up to the scorer's table to check back in, and that would be significant here. Chet had some monster free throws. It wasn't necessarily Chet's best game, and yet he had an incredible stat line. And yet again, in a game where he wasn't incredibly efficient from the floor, especially early on, he really found things later in the game. It was critical for the Thunder late in the game. This is the thing we've seen over these last couple of games where he's kind of struggled in comparison to his offensive input that we've seen, or output that we've seen here, early in the season. He struggled a little more as defenses start to adapt to him. But I think these 3 free throws were huge with 7.2 seconds left, ice in his veins. He's fouled by Draymond. It's actually reviewed. I believe Steve Kerr challenged it there with 7.2 seconds left in the fourth quarter. Chet hits all 3, ties it up. And the reason I mentioned Dort coming back and being so significant is because he essentially locks up Steph for a very tough contested 3-point attempt. Steph misses it. We head in overtime. And this is just a really interesting stat. The Thunder scored 118 points in regulation, despite only shooting 4 of 27 from 3, something I mentioned earlier. OKC shot 66% from inside the arc, which obviously is what kept them afloat there. And yet we're still heading to overtime with the Thunder only shooting 4-27 from 3. Now, ironically enough, overtime starts. No Josh Giddey. It was Isaiah Joe starting in his place. And Isaiah Joe is fouled from 3 by Clay to start overtime. He hits all 3 free throws, which was significant. That kind of kickstarted a pretty big run from the Thunder offensively. Shai and Jub just absolutely took over. They've been taking over all game, and we'll talk a lot about each of them here in a bit, but they just couldn't be stopped in the mid-range. They were getting to their spots, regardless of who was guarding them, whether they were contested or not. Just some significant shots. There was a really nice dub, not quite fade away, but a really nice shot. I believe it was off inside the left elbow, a nice little pull-up, and then Shai just takes over from there. 2 straight Shai baskets. With those, as well as Dub's shot that I mentioned earlier, the Thunder go on a 9-3 run, putting the Thunder up 6 against the Warriors with 3:15 to go. But then Steph happens because it's Steph. We know it's going to happen. And you know what happens when Steph plays in the Paycom Center / Chesapeake Arena? He hit some big time shots, but ultimately it was a big three of Shai, Dub, and Chet who were able to weather the storm and close this one out for OKC, and just a significant, a huge win that really speaks to to this team's ability to be able to respond to adversity. And just again, I don't know. It's just extremely impressive to see them be able to respond after that first half that they had, and the game that they had against Houston here a couple nights ago as well. So let's see. I'm getting a lot of comments here. I'm going to go through some of these comments. We'll get into some of the big themes of the game. But before that, just a lot of excitement here in the chat. I love to see it. 138 to 136. I think Malik corrected me there. I might have said that wrong earlier. Yep is asking me about Giddey's performance. We will absolutely get into that. Bryce Little, pizza rolls have returned. And what he is alluding to there for some of the newer Thunder fans is obviously the infamous meme of James Harden, Russell Westbrook, KD all going crazy. And the big meme there was when Mom makes pizza rolls. It certainly felt that way because you had Dub, you had Shai just absolutely amped there in that fourth and in overtime. Whenever there was a stop and play, or when Dub had a couple of those huge baskets, like they were just absolutely fired up. And then Chet there in overtime had a huge and one, and you see Dub and Shai both just going up and just pounding him on the chest and hyping him up. It certainly has those same vibes. I really like that comment. Let's see, a lot of Josh comments. We'll get into those, I promise. Let's see if there's anything else. Really good point here from Kristen. Tonight, Kristen S. Tonight was Mark's 100th win as a head coach, which is pretty incredible. And then Connor also mentioned Dub's best game of the season. So probably a good transition here. Let's go ahead and get into these big themes. I mean, let's be completely honest. A lot of these are players. And I think the biggest one, or the biggest two, really, you guys mentioned Dub. I'm going to go ahead and start with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. 38 points, 5 rebounds, 5 assists, 5 steals, 15 of 30 from the field, 0 of 3 from 3, which is just absurd that he's still able to put up that kind of stat line, and 8 of 11 from the free throw line. We're talking about a player who had a 5x5 game and scores 38 points and is 50% from the field on 30 shot attempts. Like, I'm not sure. There's so many other themes going into this season, and Shai was so incredible last season. He's continued that same level of play this season. Obviously, this team's taken the lead because guys like Chet are back are now in the lineup. J-Dub's obviously taken the leap. We've had some really great bench contribution from guys like Isaiah Joe, Aaron Wiggins, et cetera. And yet, it almost feels like Shai is being overshadowed by that a little bit, just because this is what Shai does. Well, tonight, 38 points, a 5x5 game on 50% from the floor. Like I mentioned, it's not like he only shot like 5 of 10. Like, there are players who can do that. And it's still incredibly impressive, but they're maybe like, again, 5 of 10 from the field. Not this guy. This is an absolute two-way superstar. And his defense, his perimeter defense, the steals he's been able to create, leading to those transition points I talked so much about, really sparked the offense. And then you see Shai being able to go and get still be able to get to his spots against a really good defensive team. Well, historically a good defensive team in Golden State. I mean, just phenomenal. There's not enough to say about Shai and the way he took over there and that second half particularly, and then into overtime, and the fact that he was able to do so alongside a player like Dub. Like, this is everything we've asked for, everything we've wanted from Thunder fans. Sorry, I'm looking at comments here. I have the thumbnail. Oh yeah, I had a typo. I have 138 to 116 overtime. That'd be awesome if the Thunder were able to blow the brakes off the Warriors and ended up winning by 20 in overtime. That's not the case. That was simply a typo. So thank you, Emerson, for pointing that out from what you mentioned earlier. 138 to 136, obviously, for the Thunder. Now, like I mentioned, Shai, which is absolutely fantastic, completely took over the game. But this is not a win without J-Dub and his performance. Dub has 28 points, 5 rebounds, 2 assists, 12 of 15 from the floor. So he has 28 points, 10 less than Shai on half as many shot attempts, which is crazy. Only 1-1 from the free throw line. It's not like he was getting all those from the free throw line. He was, he was 1-1 from 3, but 3 of 4 from the free throw line. So still only 4 free throw attempts. Still was able to put up those numbers. Just absolutely insane. 3 steals from Dub. He was doing it on both ends of the floor. And the biggest thing for me with J-Dub is the impact he was able to have when Shai was off the court. We've been looking for him to do this. When Shai's off the court, he's leading that second unit. Like, we need someone to step up. A lot of times it's been a effort by, what's the phrase I'm looking for there? I almost said by community, but essentially it's been a team effort when Shai's off the floor, like with guys like Isaiah Joe and others that are able to hit outside shots and really kind of keep the offense afloat when Shai's out. That wasn't the case tonight. In a game where the Thunder were really struggling from outside, getting outside shots to flow, it was Dub who basically just took over the Shai role. I talked about this earlier in the season in the game where I thought Dub did something similar. I mean, obviously he gets to his spots in very different ways than Shai, but the fact that he's able to get to those shots and just kind of take over a game offensively was significant. I thought he played really well defensively as well. And he's tasked to guard some of the bigger players on the opposing team, where he's often outsized and still is able to compete with them physically. Like, it's just, there is enough to be said about J-Dub. And to see what I think the biggest thing, something that we've looked for all season, we were looking forward to seeing heading into this season, is like, how is Dub able to continue to improve his game and kind of show what he's capable of alongside Shai? Because like I mentioned, it's easy for a player who's a really great 3-point threat to be able to like get catch and shoot threes and catch and shoot opportunities off of Shai drives. That's not necessarily Dub's game. So to see them be able to coexist like they were, to be able to take over a game together, especially there in that fourth quarter and overtime, I mean, that's everything that we've wanted to see as Thunder fans with Dub and with Shai. And I think this is just a game that maybe we will look back. Maybe I'm overhyping this one after being a little too in my emotions after the Wednesday Rockets game. If you guys listened to the post game that we did Wednesday after the Rockets game, it's easy to get a little too excited after wins like these, but I'm not sure I'm really overreacting here, because what Dub was able to do alongside Shai seems very sustainable. Like I mentioned, just his ability to be able to bully guys on the offensive side of the floor and get to his spots regardless. The shot making ability is just huge. And obviously that next stage, I think, of Dub's development is going to be to improve that 3-point shot, like a lot of players on this Thunder roster, and to maybe be a little more aggressive with those 3-point shots. But when you're able to get to the spots that you want, I mean, I don't blame him. I'm just saying that's maybe the next evolution of Dub when he's playing alongside a superstar player like SGA. Because, man, when those two are going and they're able to do so in tandem, this Thunder team is a very, very hard team to beat. And that kind of leads me to the third of what we're calling the big three here in Chet Holmgren. And I thought Chet kind of struggled yet again early on, especially in that first half. Some forced shots for sure, but just didn't seem like he was extremely aggressive, crashing the boards, maybe was forcing things a little too much. Like, these are all themes that we've seen over the past couple of games from Chet. But for him to be able to rebound, and no pun intended, and to end the game, especially there in that fourth quarter, like I mentioned, those 3 free throws were just gigantic. For him to not have necessarily like a huge offensive game, like we saw that last time that the Thunder played Golden State and Chet had 30 plus and hit the huge 3-point shot to put the game into overtime in the Bay. That wasn't necessarily the case for Chet tonight, but he continues to impact the game at an extremely high level. I'm kind of rambling here because there's so many thoughts about Chet, but I'm going back to that first half. Even when he was struggling offensively, he picked up his 3rd foul pretty early on after Daignault challenged it and was very upset with the refs at this point. He was unsuccessful in that challenge, which honestly, I think he probably should have been. Obviously, I have Thunder blue and orange colored glasses on. I understand that, but I'm pretty biased. I did not think that was necessarily a foul that should have been called on Chet to get him with 3 fouls early on the game. And yet Mark continues to trust his players, his best players, especially in Chet. And I thought Chet had a really good defensive impact there down the stretch before he was subbed out to end the quarter, simply because he was playing a lot of minutes, or he was playing a significant amount of minutes there. Like, that just shows you Chet's IQ. And then he's able to come in in that second half. Again, didn't really have a huge second half, but is able to knock down those huge 3 free throws there with 7 seconds left to tie the game and send this game into overtime when he was kind of struggling offensively. Like, there's just not enough words to describe his mentality, I think, that he brings, even more so than just his skill set. And I just continue to be so impressed by Chet Holmgren. Ends the game with 21 points, 7 rebounds, 1 assist. Even with his quote-unquote struggles, he was 6-12 from the floor, 50%, which is pretty significant. It was more so that he just wasn't getting involved in the action. It just was one of those games. I thought he responded incredibly well. 1 of 4 from 3. Obviously, when Chet is not spacing the floor like that, that's where we see, and again, this isn't just a Chet thing. This is a bigger theme. And I kind of tweeted this out, and a lot of y'all had great points that some of this comes down to Josh Giddey and how he's being guarded. But when Chet is 1 of 4 from 3 and Lou Dort is 0 of 3 from 3, that starting lineup really struggles to coexist. That's just the reality of it. When you're not able to space the floor like that, and you have a player like Josh Giddey who's really not being defended from the perimeter, that clogs up the lane and makes things very difficult on Shai, who we saw get off to a very slow start there in that first quarter. Even Dub and even Giddey, who I thought, like I said, he had a pretty good first half, but still, when there's no spacing, I mean, that's just kind of that kills that entire lineup. And so that's something I want to continue to monitor with Chet as defenses are continuing to adjust to him and the way he's playing. Would really like to see Chet obviously be able to knock down some of those outside shots. I think 4 3-point attempts from him is fine, especially when he didn't really have it going. But again, 8 of 8 from the free throw line. That's significant. 3 of those, like I mentioned, those last 3 there with 7 seconds to go. He played with 4 fouls, did not foul out, which is significant, and 3 blocks doing the Chet things. Like, especially there in that overtime, Chet really found his fit within that lineup. I thought he played significant. Like I mentioned, I can't remember when this happened, but he had a huge and one where he was able to grab an offensive rebound, which we've talked so much about, how badly the Thunder need players to be aggressive and get those offensive and defensive rebounds. He gets a huge offensive rebound there in overtime, leading to that 8-1. And that's when we saw Shai and Dub back to the pizza roll meme, right? Like going up and just hyping him up and getting super excited. Chet steps up to the occasion, I think is what I'm really getting at here. Even if it wasn't necessarily his best offensive game we saw from him this season, I mean, just significant. And for example, I actually saw a stat. It was like, I was scrolling quickly because obviously I was tuned into the Thunder game, but it was like, this is Wemby's first career blah, blah, blah. And I was like, oh, Wemby probably got his first triple-double. No, tonight was Wemby's first double-double game. Like, that is absurd. And you think about the impact that Chet has had for this team and some of the stats that he's put up. In my opinion, and again, my very biased opinion, I think it's pretty obvious that Chet Holmgren is Rookie of the Year right now. And if this continues, it's going to be very hard to take that away from him. So enough about Chet. Obviously, I've talked, I hyped him up significantly, but there's another Thunder player here before I finally kind of round this one out with some overall stats and themes, more team themes. My last player here as a big theme is Cason Wallace. Cason, I don't even think he touched the floor in overtime, but honestly, I thought Cason was phenomenal, and he was a huge reason that the Thunder was able to stay afloat. Like I mentioned, some of those non-Shai minutes. I think the perfect example of this is sometime in the third quarter. I don't have timestamps on this, but the Thunder are really struggling offensively. Cason has 5 straight points. He gets a corner 3 and then drives, again, being a little more aggressive on his drives tonight, which is good to see. Sometimes it didn't work out. I think at one point he had I was thinking it was going to be called charged. It was actually called an offensive foul, a defensive foul there in that first quarter, and he was able to get free throws, but he's being much more aggressive there after Marcus asked him to be. That's been huge for this team. But there was a stretch there where he had 5 straight points, again, shooting 7% from corners from 3, which is just absolutely absurd. And yeah, so and then he, after that corner 3, he attacks a closeout and scores on a high rising finger roll. That was just big time. I thought he played really well defensively as well. I mean, he's a rookie, he's young, he's going to make mistakes. There were certainly some of those. But when you're going up against Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, whoever was in the game at that point for the Warriors, Aaron Wiggins, I always do that. We always do that. Andrew Wiggins for the Warriors. I mean, I thought Kaysen did a fantastic job on the other end of the floor as well. He has some big time steals, and he just continues to know where to be off ball as well. He fits so well within the flow of the offense. So, like all of those things being said, I actually sent this in our uncontested group chat that we have on Slack, and I said, look, like again, I'm not trying to like say I'm completely out on Giddey, but when you have a player like Kaysen who fits so well within the flow of any lineup and is able to impact the game at such a high level, we didn't expect this so early on. And to see Kaysen be able to do this, even while Josh Giddey, especially when Josh Giddey is struggling. I mean, I can only imagine what this starting lineup looks like when you have a player like Kaysen Wallace in there. You add that defense that he's able to bring while Josh has been struggling a lot defensively. And obviously the floor spacing that he's able to bring from a catch and shoot standpoint as well. Again, maybe it's not the starting lineup necessarily, but when you're closing a game, and if it's not Isaiah Joe that you have in there, like I would love to see Kaysen get some more burn with that starting unit minus Josh. That's not me just trying to continue to pile on Josh, but I think we're all in agreement here when I'm taking all these comments about Josh and his struggles and how teams are adapting to him and playing off of him. He's still trying to work through those things. I get the Thunder and Dignall allowing Josh to be able to work through those things, and that's really important for this team and their overall ceiling. But when you have a player like Kaysen playing like he is and impacting the game on both sides of the basketball and still learning and still having so much untapped potential on the offensive end of the floor, in my opinion, like I'd like to see him get some more minutes with those starters, even if it's not necessarily in the starting lineup. I thought Kaysen was fantastic again, even if we didn't see him in overtime. I totally get it. Isaiah Joe, when he, again, kind of a similar thing with Isaiah Joe. He is impacting the game on both sides of the floor. He had another charge drawn tonight, which was huge. And obviously we know the floor spacing and shooting that he provides, like a lot of things to be excited about when you have players like Isaiah Joe and Kaysen Wallace who are able to just step up. I mean, you could throw Kenneth Williams in there and Aaron Wiggins as well. I don't have those as themes. These are more like small themes, small sides, but man, like there is a lot of depth on this Thunder roster. It's just something to kind of keep in mind when Josh Giddey is struggling. It's kind of what I'm getting at. So again, very, very high on Kaysen Wallace, as you guys can tell. And I'm just really excited to see how he continues to progress through the season as teams maybe start to scout him a little more. And even into next season, as you know, we talk a lot about sophomores. They're scouted even more so than their rookie year. So it'll be fascinating to watch Kaysen's progression. Now, like I mentioned, getting into a little more team themes. The biggest one here for me is the Thunder's steals and turnovers. Just, I mean, this, when you're not shooting well from outside, you're not shooting well as a whole, although they obviously continue to shoot better throughout as the game progressed. But 29 turnovers, forced turnovers for the Thunder. Excuse me. Hopefully they didn't have 29 turnovers. I would have no idea how they would win a game in overtime if they did have 29 turnovers. But 29 forced turnovers tied a Thunder record against Dallas on actually New Year's Eve 2018. It's the last time they did that, which is just pretty incredible. Obviously, this Warriors team has really struggled. I think they were like top 6 in turnovers per game, if I remember what I heard correctly during the broadcast. But the Thunder forcing 29 turnovers is huge. And the thing is, it wasn't just like bad passes necessarily from the Warriors. Thunder's they caused 17 steals, which is only 2 away from a Thunder team record if you don't include the Seattle days. I believe the Thunder themselves as a franchise had 19 steals not too long ago. I want to say it was in November, but 17 steals, forcing 17 steals and 29 turnovers is just significant. And like I've mentioned so much on this podcast, as we mentioned so much on this podcast, this Thunder team is at their best when the team is creating those turnovers, getting stops defensively and pushing the ball in transition. And that's what we saw that really sparked that second half comeback, that third quarter specifically, and then again overtime. I mean, just significant. Cannot talk enough about the Thunder defense there. And that's what kept them afloat. To my next point, the Thunder shooting. The Thunder shot, let me go and look at this. They ended up being 52% from the floor. Like I mentioned, that fourth quarter and overtime really kind of upped the overall percentage. They were 51 of 98 from the floor, but shot only 5 of 29 from the floor. That's 17%. That's really bad. I can't remember the last time that happened. Unfortunately, I'm sure it did happen over the past couple of seasons, given the different lineups and personnel Thunder have rolled out on the floor. That's really uncharacteristic of this Thunder team, specifically this season, who, like I mentioned, I haven't double checked this, but when I was listening to Matt Pinto, he told me on the radio that the Thunder led the league in 3-point percentage heading into tonight. So 5 of 29 is pretty awful. The biggest thing here, and I harped a lot on some of the questionable foul calls, especially there in the first half, but the Thunder ended up getting 36 free throws to the Warriors 23. The Warriors were 19 and 23. They're very efficient from the free throw line, but so were the Thunder, 31 of 36 from the free throw line. That is significant. A lot of those came towards the latter part of the game, especially when Shai and Dub, or really just Shai, because I think Dub only had, whatever I said, 3 free throws. Especially Shai getting to the line like he was and getting those foul calls and just really not even leaving it to chance, like forcing the refs to be able to make those calls. That's significant. But you look at the shot attempts at a whole, the Thunder shot 98 shot attempts to the Warriors 104. And when you give a Warriors team that many more attempts from the floor, and we know what that Warriors team can do when you have Steph Curry and even Clay, who obviously has really struggled and is a shell of himself, but still, I did it again. Andrew Wiggins had a really good first half. I think he had like 18 points in the first half. I mean, there's a lot of players on the Warriors who can make you pay for that. The Thunder played really good defense, forced a lot of those extra shots, some bad shot attempts, and obviously we're a lot more efficient down the stretch on their own. I find that interesting when I'm looking at those shooting splits in general. But the last theme that I have here at about 32 minutes, some Giddey thoughts. You guys have mentioned this a lot. There's a lot of comments about him, and I'll get through it. I thought Giddey played much better early on in the game. He was driving. He was making floaters. He was more efficient. But the biggest thing for Giddey when he's playing with this lineup is he's not able to space the floor still, and he's really struggling defensively. There were some missed assignments there that were pretty significant, even there in that fourth quarter when he was starting, that I thought were I mean, I don't know, not great. We'll leave it at that. I thought Josh played better, but the biggest thing here is when, like I mentioned earlier, when you have guys like Isaiah Joe and Cason Wallace and Aaron Wiggins and Kendrick Williams who can come in and really give the Thunder what they're missing in that lineup, right? I don't know. I've talked a lot about Giddey. I'm already going long here. I've already talked a lot and kind of alluded to a lot of it earlier here in the podcast, but it's not been great for Josh, even when he's having a more efficient game like tonight. I think is what I'm really getting at in tonight's game. It's easy to talk about like the Rockets game where he's playing extremely poorly, but tonight, like he was playing all right, especially offensively. And still, this team was better with him off the floor. And that's why we didn't see him there after he was subbed out with about 8 minutes left in the fourth quarter and didn't see him again in overtime. Not trying to just pile on Josh Giddey, but a lot of you guys have talked about him here in the chat. And obviously, it's a big thing for this Thunder team because when you have like Kevon Looney guarding Josh Giddey and playing off of him, that allows somebody like Draymond Green to be able to guard a Dub or guard edge. I think in this case, it was Chet, right? Instead of the opposing big guarding Chet. And maybe that's why we've seen Chet be a little more efficient because he's having some better defenders who are able to guard him rather than like the opposing center where he's able to space the floor and have more of an advantage. It's something to monitor for sure and something we'll continue to monitor. So really quickly here, like I said, I already have talked a lot about this, but I know you guys have some Giddey thoughts. We're going to get through these quickly and we'll get out of here. So again, this is kind of tough when there's only one of us on the pod and I'm trying to go through comments. EQ, our guy EQ mentioned on the pod the other day, you would be happy if Josh rebounded. He had 9 tonight. Is that enough to make you happy? Great point. And that's what I'm talking about when I thought he impacted the game fairly well as a whole, but still wasn't able to close games because of the other things I mentioned, the floor spacing and the defense. That is huge. So yes, the rebounds is significant, but he's going to be able to have to improve in the other areas if he's going to want to stay on the floor. Connor mentioned it ended up being huge that the Warriors wasted their challenge there. And I think he's referring to when I mentioned the Chet challenge, the Draymond challenge on the Draymond foul on Chet. It's a great point. They did not have that heading into that last part of the game. Connor mentioned that old man Clay still moves his feet well, but it's Curry that you can walk past. Yeah, defensively, I mean, Clay is still a better defender, but man, he's lost a step. And I just keep thinking back to when our guy Jacob was at the first Thunder Warriors game in Paycom this season. He sent us a picture close up of the difference in Clay's 2 calf muscles, and it's significant. Like, that guy's just, it's not the same. Not the same as at all. Zuri mentions, how much better will this young team be by the playoffs? I think that's a really good point. We're seeing this team go face adversity early on in the season. You can only imagine, knock on wood, pending health, how good they can be if they continue to face these the adversity and continue to overcome it and learn from it when they weren't able to overcome it. For example, against the Houston Rockets, something to keep in mind there. But I think you're exactly right. The learning experiences here for this team, they'll be night and day better heading into the playoffs this season, which is extremely exciting. Brett mentions that Kaysen is not a great rebounder, and I think you're exactly right. That's something he's really going to have to improve as well. So I think what he's getting at is, if you throw him into that starting lineup, like I mentioned, you're losing rebounding, especially to, I went blank on who mentioned that here a little bit ago, but when Josh has 9 rebounds and you're missing that from the starting lineup, that's significant. And that's a really good point. That's probably a reason that Mark hasn't implemented it yet. And maybe we won't see it as much. Again, great point, and something we need to monitor, and something that Kaysen either needs to improve on, or the lineup as a whole needs to improve on, or maybe there's another option there to help with the rebounding that still can provide you some of those weak points, cover some of those weak points that Josh has when he's in that starting lineup. And then finally here, Jason Williams, what a fun game to go to. So shout out, Jason. I'm glad you were there. That's awesome. Giddey needs to be able to shoot. He messes up spacing, not trying to say he's a bad player. J-Dub was crazy, amazing. Yeah, a lot of things I mentioned there. Could not agree more. All right. We covered a lot of ground, especially for a solo pod. That was a very fun game to be able to cover. Extremely thankful for all of you all tuning in and dropping your comments and questions in the chat. Makes it a lot of fun for us to be able to engage with you all. And again, what a fun game. What a fun team to be able to cover here this season and as a whole in general. So looking ahead, Sunday night, we'll have you all covered with a group podcast covering the week that was in Thunder basketball, and looking forward to the week ahead, as well as some bigger around the association thoughts. Then we have another game Monday night in Paycom, Thunder versus Jazz. Extremely exciting. The Thunder, I would hope, would beat the brakes off the Jazz. That's a team that they should be able to beat well. But I think Lauri Markkanen is back, which makes that Jazz team a lot more dangerous. So something to keep an eye on. But should be a really fun one. I hope you all, if you're able to, are able to go out to the Paycom. And if not, be sure to follow along, because we will have you all covered for that. And we'll have a post-game podcast Monday night for you all as well to tune into. And then finally, not a game, but a significant vote. If you are living in the OKC Metro and are able to vote on it, vote yes on Tuesday for the Thunder Arena. There's a lot of differing opinions there. You all know where we stand. I'm not going to get into it now here on the post-game podcast, but Tuesday is extremely important for the future, not only of this organization, this franchise, but the city as a whole, in Oklahoma City. I highly encourage you all to go and listen to David Holt. He was on the Oklahoma Breakdown with Gabe Eichard and Teddy Lehman. Thought he just laid things out really, really well, and even responded to some of the criticism and brought some great counterpoints there. Be sure to check that out before you vote if you're kind of on the fence, because I think Mayor Holt did a great job there. And be sure to just follow along with Mayor Holt in general. He's been on a lot of different things. Sellout Crowd had him on, and he did a great job there as well. And that'll be the case leading up to the vote on Tuesday. So be sure to vote if you can on Tuesday. So that way we can keep podcasting and talking about this incredible team and seeing them in person in Oklahoma City, and they'll be in OKC for a very, very long time. So thank you all again for tuning in. An incredibly fun and exciting game. Appreciate you all, like I mentioned, with all the correspondence and the comments and questions. Stay tuned. We'll have you all covered again for that group podcast I mentioned on Sunday. And as always, and until next time, Thunder up.